Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 26th September 2023. My name is T.S.V. Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. Hardan, 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 Haribol, TRSV, Nectar, NECTAR, Nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been discussing about the knowledge and information that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of all that we have been doing in all my previous videos. Kindly subscribe to this vlog and press the bell icon so that I may keep reminding you of all my previous and future videos. So let us continue with the topic of discussion for today's video. In the past few videos, we have been trying to talk about a very special spiritual term called liberation. Liberation officially means the process of liberating a particular spirit soul from its material identity as a living entity by drying up or shaking away the four layers of material body that envelop around it and make it entrapped into a cocoon for times immemorial so that it may get entrapped in an endless or seemingly endless chain of repeated births and deaths in this material world. This is known as liberation or as moksha in the Hindu language Sanskrit. Liberation means freeing once for all this original spirit soul from getting entrapped into a cycle of endless births and deaths from this material world. In the process of trying to analyze this liberation, we came across or we went through several of my videos in this vlog discussing this topic and several case histories which authenticate this particular liberation. We have already discussed about the introductory part, and we have also discussed about several case histories that form a direct or indirect part of this process of liberation. However, while contemplating and meditating on this subject yesterday, I felt within that it would be unjustified to expect the viewers to understand this completely unless and until they had a thorough recap of the step by step process in which the whole thing of one spirit soul getting entrapped in four layers of material body and then getting entrapped into an seemingly endless cycle of birth and death in this material world occurs. Hence, I feel that let us to brush up our own memories and knowledge on this subject, go through a recap of the sequence of events that form part of this whole process. Let us start. There is one spiritual whole which is existing in this spiritual and material universe created by God. Spirit whole has a lot of spiritual energy of the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This spiritual whole is Lord's superior energy. Lord also has an inferior energy. This inferior energy is called the material universe. In other words, Lord has two types of energies, of whom the spiritual energy is superior and the material energy is inferior. This we must keep in mind before proceeding further. This spiritual whole can be compared for the average viewer with a bonfire. A bonfire is a fireplace which has a lot of fire and energy in it, and it is blazing merrily. Similarly, this spiritual bonfire, also known as spirit whole, is existing with a lot of spiritual sparks combined and collectively existing in that spiritual whole. In a bonfire, it sometimes happens that advertently or inadvertently, deliberately or otherwise, by design or by default, some fire sparks get ejected out of this bonfire. In other words, they cease to be a part of the collective bonfire. In such a case. These fire sparks, which have got ejected from the bonfire, start floating aimlessly and endlessly in the ether or in the space. Air is a part of this ether or space. These fire sparks, which are now existing individually in the space, invariably get extinguished by the power of that air. In other words, while the bonfire is collective and very powerful, an individual fire spark is no match to the force and energy of that air, as a result of which it sooner or later gets extinguished. Now compare this bonfire with the spirit hole. The spirit hole, similarly, is a collection of these individual spirit sparks. As before, some spirit sparks may advertently or inadvertently get ejected out of this spirit hole. These spirit sparks get an independent identity and they start floating in the space aimlessly and endlessly. But unlike those fire sparks which are a part of the Lord's material energy, these spirit sparks are also individual, but they are Lord's superior energy, so they cannot be extinguished by the air or ether in the space. This makes these spirit sparks quite complacent. They become overconfident that individually they can stand up to the whole material world, which is the Supreme Personality of Godhead's inferior energy. After circulating in this space for eons, centuries, and millenniums, these complacent spirit sparks ultimately detect the complete material world. As I said before, this material world is the inferior energy of the Lord. But here I would like to point out that inferior or superior both belong to the Lord. Hence, the superior part of energy can never ever imagine of grappling with the inferior material energy. However, these individual spirit sparks, ignorant of this fact and blissfully overconfident and complacent, think that they can lord it over this material world as an individual spirit spark. They forget there conveniently that they may be qualitatively superior to the inferior material energy, but yet quantitatively this collective material world is superior to this spirit spark, which is tiny, minuscule, and individual, and is helpless in front of the brute strength of the collective material world. In other words, the spirit whole, which is akin to a bonfire, would never have tried to grapple with the material world, but this ignorant and stupid, myopic spiritual spark feels that it can grapple with this material world alone. Not only this, as they say, opposites attract. The spirit soul gets attracted to the beauty and mysterious energy of the material world. When it does, it comes in touch with this material world without even condescending to ask this material world whether it approves such touch. If only this spirit spark had asked this material world, it would have told it in so many words that it does not appreciate such touch by the spirit spark, though this spirit spark feels that being the superior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it can do anything as far as its relationship with the inferior material energy is concerned. To make the whole story short, this spirit spark, this individual spirit spark tries to get in touch with this material world. Initially, this material world shies away from this, but the adamant spirit spark does ultimately succeed in touching this material world. As soon as it does so, this spirit spark, which was floating happily and independently in the space for times immemorial, loses its original identity and becomes a spirit soul. No more is it a spirit spark. It has now become a spirit soul. When this spirit soul gets in touch with the material world, this material world gets visibly irritated. Here we can have another comparison or story which will make this clear to the average viewer of this video. There are lots of shellfishes in the ocean. These shellfishes, which are lying deep into the ocean, make their mouths open wide to attract cool particles to drop into that open, wide mouth. In that case, food particles invariably drop into that shelf and its open mouth. As soon as it does, this shellfish closes its mouth and digests that food particle through the layer of saliva and flesh that is laid across in the interior part of that shellfish. As soon as it has digested this food particle, it again opens its mouth to attract new food particles. But sometimes, deliberately or otherwise, some other foreign particles like a piece of sand, stone, or any other such particle drops into the open mouth of this shellfish. As soon as it docks, this shellfish invariably closes its mouth. However, only after doing so it realizes that this foreign particle is no food for that shellfish. This irritates this shellfish no end. It does not have the power to spit this foreign particle out, but it does not want it inside the mouth also. In such a case, to avoid this irritation, this shellfish begins wrapping this foreign particle with endless layers of its own saliva to prevent that irritation. When it does so, this foreign particle becomes a cocoon on its own and remains haplessly inside that shellfish. Someday, this shellfish opens its mouth, variably, inadvertently, or advertently. In that case, this cocoon of foreign particle drops out either into the ocean or when some fisherman prices open the two sides of that shellfish. Inside, this fisherman spots that cocoon and takes it out. It has now been transformed into a priceless pearl which is used to make jewelry for women. Similarly, when this spirit spark turned spirit whole gets in touch with the material world, this material world slowly but steadily, step by step, over eons, decades, centuries, and millenniums, wraps up this foreign particle called spirit soul with four layers of its own material body. These four layers are known as first layer of causal intelligence and logic. Second layer of astral mind of feelings and emotions. Third layer of etheric body of five senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and the fourth gross body made up of four elements, namely air, fire, water, and earth. The first three layers are made up of the first element of the material world, namely ether. In other words, these four layers of material body are made up of five elements. These five elements are: first, ether; second, air; third, fire; and fourth, water. While ether is the main ingredient to form the three subtle bodies of causal intelligence, astral mind, and etheric senses, the other four elements, namely air, fire, water, and earth, are used to form the gross body, which is the fourth layer. This complete process takes millenniums at the least. It does not happen overnight. Just like that foreign particle became a pearl after being wrapped up by the shellfish's saliva, similarly, this spirit soul, when it is wrapped up with four layers of material body, loses its original identity as a spirit soul and becomes known as a living entity. A long gap follows when this new living entity gets adjusted to its new surrounding of the material world. Now, this spirit soul is a hapless passenger or resident of these four layers of material body. This living entity then starts slowly but steadily getting into a chain of endless births and deaths in this material world. This happens slowly, but then there are invariably infinite births and deaths in infinite species for that living entity. The first birth of that living entity is that of a soul, a cell. The cell in the material world is the first birth of that living entity. From there, it gradually progresses as algae, amoeba, weeds, grass, creepers, plants, trees, worms, ants, insects, reptiles, amphibians, beasts, birds, and finally it gets born as a human being and a species of its own as human. In even this human being species, there are 400,000 different types of human beings. This spirit soul turned living entity, according to its own destiny, karma, and evolvement in this material world, takes birth in either all of them or part of those human species before getting fully evolved. Destiny or karma starts only when this living entity takes birth in this human species. Before that, it only has memories, short ones or long ones, and these memories are stored in the subconscious of those living entities in various species. In other words, as long as this living entity is not born as a human being, it only has memories of its existence in various lifetimes in other species, and these memories come in handy in making out the destiny or karma which begin when the same living entity is born in the human species. We shall continue this in my next video to understand the whole process better for us all. We must understand this process completely to understand where we stand and where we have to reach as our ultimate goal in our lifetime. But before that, let me give you a hint. The stages on the spiritual path are first to get self realized as a spirit soul, second, to get liberated from this repeated chain or cycle of births and deaths in this particular material world, and third, to get delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a completely evolved soul. This is a very long process, but at least we know where we have to reach. We will continue with this discussion in my next video. Kindly let me know what you think of my talk on this particular matter. Please give me your own expert views, thoughts, and ideas plus opinions so that I may blend everything together for the sake of this society. Before concluding, let me remind you that I am also a published author with Amazon Kindle and paperback. I write on spiritualism, fiction, and assorted subjects. Spiritualism happens to be my favorite subject. Till we meet in my next video, it is good morning from TSV Raghavan.